The vast, indifferent sky above Flanders mirrored the souls of the men below, a gray canvas stretched taut over a landscape scarred by the unending hunger of war. It was a cruel irony, this distant land, so unlike the vibrant, sun-drenched plains they called home, yet it held them captive in its frigid embrace. A profound reflection often settled upon Havildar Rajan Singh, a quiet understanding that a war fought halfway across the world for reasons not entirely his own could still claim every fiber of a man's being. He carried the weight of this universal truth in the steady set of his shoulders, a testament to the myriad of human experiences bound by the threads of conflict. Rajan Singh was a man carved from the rugged, proud lineage of Sikh warriors, his presence a blend of quiet strength and profound introspection. His eyes, the color of rich earth, held a depth that spoke of ancient wisdom and recent sorrows, constantly observing, internalizing the bleak reality surrounding him. Beneath his steel helmet, the tightly wound turban, usually a symbol of vibrant heritage, was now perpetually smudged with the gray grime of the trenches, a stark visual metaphor for the erosion of spirit that this war wrought. He moved with a measured dignity, his tall, lean frame suggesting a resilience that belied the gnawing weariness etched around his mouth. Morally, Rajan was a man of unwavering principles, driven by duty and a deep, quiet love for his people, even as the ethical ambiguities of his situation pressed down upon him. Psychologically, he was a fortress, yet one constantly under siege. The constant threat, the pervasive cold, and the subtle, often unspoken distrust from some of his British counterparts were invisible enemies chipping away at his resolve, leaving him with a profound sense of isolation despite being surrounded by men. The biting European wind, a constant, unseen antagonist, whipped through the trenches, carrying with it the metallic tang of distant shell fire and the cloying scent of damp earth and decay. It was a smell that clung to everything, to their rough woolen uniforms, to their very skin, seeping into the core of their being. Rajan pulled his thick greatcoat tighter, the coarse fabric scratching against his chin, offering little true warmth against the pervasive chill that seemed to penetrate bone and spirit alike. He often found himself contemplating the stark contrast between this desolate, mud-choked landscape and the vibrant colors of Jaipur, the bustling markets, the sweet aroma of spices carried on a warm breeze, the laughter of children playing in the sun-drenched courtyards. These fleeting sensory memories were precious, fragile fragments of a world that felt impossibly distant, a tether to the life he might never reclaim. His regiment, a patchwork of Indian Punjabis and the formidable Gurkhas from Nepal, huddled together in the dugout, their breaths misting in the frigid air. The low murmur of their conversations, a mix of Punjabi, Nepali, and broken English, was a small comfort against the overwhelming silence that often fell between shellings, a silence far more terrifying than the cacophony of battle, for it allowed the mind to wander into the darkest corners of despair. Rajan understood that each man carried his own burden of memories and fears, a silent symphony of anxieties that played out beneath the stoic exteriors. He saw it in the way Sepoy Karim Singh, a Punjabi recruit barely out of his teens, meticulously polished his rifle, his movements a desperate search for order in a world of chaos. He noticed it in the faraway look in the eyes of Corporal Bishnu Rai, a Gurkha whose usually jovial demeanor had been replaced by a quiet vigilance, his hand never far from the kukri sheathed at his belt. The anticipation of the coming offensive, the notorious Battle of the Somme, hung heavy in the air, a palpable dread that permeated every fiber of their existence. Whispers of the objective, a seemingly impenetrable enemy strongpoint, had filtered down the lines, confirming what most already suspected. It would be a suicidal charge. Rajan observed his men, their faces etched with a cocktail of weariness, grim determination, and a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they might somehow defy the odds. He knew their courage was not born of recklessness, but of a deeper, more profound loyalty to each other, to their unspoken promise to see this through no matter the cost. He felt a fierce, protective instinct swell within him, a silent vow to lead them with honor, even if it meant leading them to their end. The subtle tremors of the earth, faint vibrations from the distant artillery, served as a constant, ominous reminder of the inferno that awaited them. This cold, unyielding ground would soon be drenched in blood, a testament to the lives offered on an altar of imperial ambition, so far from the ancient, sacred soil they called home. The full weight of their displacement, of being pawns on a grand, brutal chessboard, pressed upon Rajan. He knew that for many back in India, their struggle here would remain an abstract concept, a footnote in a distant war. Yet here they were, breathing the same cold air, fearing the same indiscriminate death as any British Tommy or French poilu. The universal reflection of humanity's shared vulnerability in the face of such overwhelming power was a stark, bitter truth. He glanced at the makeshift lamp flickering in the corner of the dugout, its feeble light casting long, dancing shadows that mimicked the uncertainty in their own hearts. The rhythmic drip of water from the dugout ceiling was a metronome counting down the dwindling hours, each droplet a tiny, melancholy echo of the precious time slipping away. Soon the command would come, and they would rise, not as men from Jaipur or the remote hills of Nepal, but simply as soldiers marching into the maw of the Somme. The cold, unforgiving grip of the European winter had settled deep into their bones, a constant reminder of the alien land they now inhabited. Yet, amidst the pervasive chill and the omnipresent threat of death, a different kind of warmth had begun to coalesce within the dugouts and along the frozen trench lines, the profound heat of brotherhood. It was an unspoken, visceral connection, born not of shared language or culture, but of shared suffering and a grim, unwavering commitment to protect one another in a world determined to tear them apart. Rajan often observed this quiet bond, a subtle understanding passing between men who had witnessed unspeakable horrors together, finding solace in the silent acknowledgement of their collective plight. Among them was Sepoy Threem Singh, a young Punjabi recruit, whose youthful exuberance had been slowly, painfully eroded by the grim realities of the front. Physically, Karim was slight, almost boyish, with sharp, intelligent eyes that once held a vibrant curiosity, but now often flickered with a raw, unmasked fear. His hands, though calloused from rifle drills, still retained a certain softness, hinting at a life before the trenches filled with textbooks rather than bayonets. Morally, he was earnest, deeply respectful of Rajan and fiercely loyal to his comrades, grappling with the moral compromises that war demanded. Psychologically, Karim was a raw nerve, acutely sensitive to the pervasive dread, prone to vivid nightmares that often left him shivering and drenched in sweat. Yet he possessed an admirable resilience, always finding a way to push forward for the sake of the men beside him. He frequently sought out Rajan not for words of comfort, but for the quiet reassurance of the Havildar's steady presence. Then there was Corporal Bishnu Rai, a Gurkha, with a reputation for unyielding bravery and a surprisingly gentle humor that now rarely surfaced. Bishnu was powerfully built, his compact frame packed with muscle, and his dark, keen eyes missed nothing. His face, weathered by the sun and wind of Nepal, was typically etched with a stoic calm, but Rajan could detect the subtle tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands when the distant artillery intensified. Morally, Bishnu was a pragmatist, guided by the Gurkha ethos of unwavering duty and honor, yet haunted by the lives he had taken and the ones he could not save. Psychologically, he was a silent warrior, internalizing his fears and anxieties, turning them into a grim determination that masked a deep weariness, a longing for the simple peace of his Himalayan home. He often cleaned his kukri, the legendary Gurkha blade, with a meditative precision, the glint of the steel a stark contrast to the dull, muddy surroundings. The men communicated not just through words, but through shared glances, the tightening of a jaw, the slight incline of a head. Rajan understood that these subtle cues carried more weight than any spoken command. He recalled a moment when Karim had recounted, his voice low and strained, how he had seen his elder brother fall in an earlier skirmish. Rajan had simply placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of silent acknowledgement, the profound weight of shared grief needing no verbal articulation. Later, Bishnu had quietly shared a memory of his village, describing the vibrant green of the paddy fields and the cool rush of mountain streams, his words a stark contrast to the barren, churned-up earth of the trench. These brief, poignant exchanges were like fragile lanterns in the encroaching darkness, illuminating the shared humanity beneath the uniforms and the mud. The routine of trench life was a monotonous cycle of digging, watching, and waiting, punctuated by moments of sudden visceral terror. The air was thick with the smell of stale rations, damp wool, and the ever-present stench of unwashed bodies. Rajan often found himself gazing at a small, tarnished silver amulet he kept beneath his tunic, a gift from his wife before he left Jaipur. It was a small, smooth disc, cool against his skin, carrying the faint, lingering scent of the rose water she used. This object, seemingly insignificant, was a powerful symbolic anchor, connecting him to a life, a love, and a spiritual solace that felt increasingly distant. He would trace the worn engravings on its surface, a silent prayer for strength, for guidance, for a return to the world where such simple comforts were not luxuries but given rights. As the days dwindled, the distant rumbling of artillery grew more insistent, a ceaseless, ominous prelude to the storm. The British officers, their faces grim, had begun to outline the final brutal details of the assault on the German strongpoint. Rajan observed the men's reactions. Some grew quieter, their eyes distant, while others became almost feverishly active, cleaning equipment with renewed vigor, as if physical exertion could quell the internal turmoil. He noticed how Bishnu's gaze would often linger on Karim, a silent promise of protection passing between the seasoned warrior and the younger recruit. The thought of leading these brave, weary men into such an inferno was a heavy burden, a crushing responsibility. He felt the tightening in his own gut, a cold knot of dread that mirrored the fear he knew coursed through his men. Yet he allowed no trace of it to show on his face, understanding that his unwavering resolve was their most vital shield. He told himself that to falter, even for a moment, would be to betray the unspoken trust that had been forged in this brutal, alien landscape. The bitter wind howled, a mournful lament across the desolate plains, carrying the whispers of the coming storm, a storm from which few, if any, would emerge unscathed. The night before the offensive, the trench line became a crucible of suppressed emotions, a grim theater where the true battle for a man's spirit unfolded long before the first whistle. The pervasive dampness of the earth seemed to seep into every pore, carrying with it the cold breath of impending doom. Rajan could hear the frantic scratching of rats in the trench walls, a mundane sound amplified into a symphony of dread by the heightened senses of men of a precipice of oblivion. The silence, when it fell between the distant thunder of the artillery, was profound and suffocating, each tick of an unseen clock echoing the dwindling moments of ordinary life. This was the moment the true antagonist of their story revealed itself, not the enemy across no man's land, but the insidious, corrosive environment that preyed upon the very core of their psychological resilience. He walked along the narrow, muddy passage, his boots squelching softly with each step, a rhythmic reminder of their unavoidable path forward. The air hung heavy with the acrid scent of stale cigarette smoke, sweat, and the metallic tang that often preceded the coming of shells. Here and there, men huddled together, their faces illuminated briefly by the weak flicker of a cigarette lighter or the guarded beam of a trench lamp. Rajan observed their subtle reactions. Some stared blankly into the middle distance, their eyes wide and unseeing, lost in a private world of terror. Others compulsively checked their equipment, their movements jerky, almost feverish. The psychological impact of the waiting was immense, transforming brave men into trembling shadows of their former selves. He noticed a Gurkha soldier, usually boisterous, now quietly carving a small, intricate figure from a piece of wood, his movements slow and deliberate, a desperate attempt to create order in the face of chaos. Rajan paused beside Karim, who sat hunched, his rifle clutched tightly to his chest. The young sepoy's body was subtly trembling, a barely perceptible shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Rajan saw the faint tremor in Karim's hand as he tried to light a cigarette, the match sputtering and dying repeatedly in his unsteady grip. "The waiting is the hardest part, isn't it?" Rajan commented, his voice a low, steady murmur, acknowledging the unspoken fear that hung between them. Karim merely nodded, his eyes fixed on some unseen point in the darkness, a single bead of sweat tracing a path down his dust-smeared temple. Rajan knew that Karim was not just contemplating the physical danger, but the profound finality of it all. The obliteration of dreams, the severing of ties, the quiet erasure of a life that had barely begun. He felt a pang of profound sadness, a paternal ache for this young man who carried the weight of a war he barely understood. Further down the line, Bishnu was sharing a tin of condensed milk with a few other Gurkhas, their low voices a comforting hum in the oppressive quiet. Bishnu's usual stoicism was a shade darker tonight, his jaw set, his eyes darting with an almost predatory awareness. He looked up as Rajan approached, offering a brief, almost imperceptible nod. "The earth feels different tonight, Havildar," Bishnu observed quietly, his voice raspy, a subtle acknowledgement of the shared foreboding. "It is hungry." Rajan understood the Gurkha's metaphorical language. The ground truly seemed to be groaning under the weight of the coming destruction. The air was thick with the earthy scent of the churned mud, combined with the sharp metallic smell of rusting barbed wire. Every breath they took seemed to be imbued with the essence of decay and violence. The British commanding officer, Captain Davies, a man whose weary eyes held the ghosts of countless battles, moved along the trench, his voice low and strained as he gave final instructions. Rajan noticed Davies's hand unconsciously touching the small cross around his neck, a subtle physical reaction that revealed the immense burden he too carried. The captain confirmed the suicidal nature of their objective, stating, his voice flat, that heavy casualties are to be expected. He spoke of duty, of king and empire, words that felt hollow and distant in the face of the imminent, brutal reality. For Rajan and his men, the concepts of a distant empire paled in comparison to the immediate, visceral terror of what lay ahead. Their duty was to each other, to the shared bond forged in this desolate crucible. As the pre-dawn hours dragged on, the sky began to lighten, a faint, sickly gray bleeding into the oppressive blackness. Rajan could feel the cold seep deeper, a chill that was not merely physical, but spiritual, reaching into the core of his being. He thought of his village, the distant sounds of morning prayers, the first rays of sunlight painting the ancient stone walls with warmth. He longed for the simple comfort of his wife's presence, the quiet strength she exuded. He knew that for countless men across this ravaged front, similar thoughts were playing out, a desperate clinging to the normalcy that felt so impossibly far away. The ground beneath his feet, once a stable foundation, now felt precarious, shifting with the tremors of impending doom. Heard the faint high-pitched whine of the incoming shells, growing louder, closer. This was it. The psychological torment of waiting was about to give way to the physical, brutal reality. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the stale air burning in his lungs, and prepared himself for the deluge. The moment of truth, A terrifying culmination of all their fears was finally upon them. The whistle shrieked, a piercing, almost human cry that tore through the pre-dawn gloom, shattering the fragile silence and unleashing the inferno. It was the signal, the dreaded call that launched them from the relative, albeit meager safety of the trenches into the maelstrom of no man's land. Rajan felt a primal surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp, as he hoisted his rifle and clambered over the parapet, the chill of the morning air replaced instantly by the suffocating heat of impending chaos. The earth beneath his feet, already churned into a viscous quagmire, seemed to groan under the sudden thunderous assault of artillery. The world instantly dissolved into a deafening symphony of destruction. Shells exploded with concussive force, tearing vast craters in the already devastated landscape, showering them with a lethal rain of mud, shrapnel, and the dismembered remains of trees and earth. The air vibrated with the continuous crackle of machine gun fire, a relentless, mechanical cough that scythed through the advancing lines. Rajan's senses were overwhelmed. The acrid smell of cordite burned his nostrils, mingling with the metallic tang of fresh blood and the sickeningly sweet scent of disturbed earth. He could barely distinguish the faces of his men through the churning smoke and the blinding flashes of explosions, their silhouettes fleeting against the backdrop of an unleashed hell. He found himself moving on instinct, a grim automaton propelled forward by years of training and a desperate internal roar. He saw Karim stumble ahead, caught in the crossfire, his young body momentarily framed by a burst of orange flame before he pitched forward. Rajan felt a guttural cry rise in his throat, a silent scream of anguish. But there was no time for grief, only the relentless forward momentum. He saw Bishnu, a solid, unyielding force pushing through the mud, his kukri glinting ominously even in the dim, chaotic light, a testament to his ferocious determination. Bishnu's eyes, when they briefly met Rajan's, held a stark, unwavering resolve, a silent promise to fight until the last breath. The ground was a treacherous, unforgiving adversary. Each step was a struggle, their boots sinking deep into the glutinous mud, threatening to pull them down into its cold, grasping embrace. Bodies lay twisted and broken, already reclaiming the earth, a grim testament to the relentless efficiency of the enemy's fire. Rajan saw men fall around him, their movements jerky, almost theatrical, as they collapsed onto the sodden ground. He heard the gurgling cries, the desperate pleas, swallowed instantly by the roaring crescendo of the battle. The psychological toll was immense. The mind struggled to process the sheer, overwhelming scale of the carnage, resorting instead to a detached, almost dreamlike state of awareness. He felt a profound sense of unreality, as if observing a horrifying tableau rather than participating in it. He pushed forward, leading the dwindling remnants of his company towards the enemy strongpoint. The German machine guns, positioned with deadly precision, seemed to spit an unending stream of lead, creating an invisible, impenetrable wall of death. Rajan felt the wind of bullets whip past his ear, the terrifying whisper of mortality. His own rifle felt heavy, almost useless against such overwhelming firepower, but he fired methodlessly, a desperate act of defiance against the inevitable. His throat was raw, his lungs burning with the exertion and the smoke-laden air. The very air they breathed seemed to be infused with despair, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on their spirits. The sounds were a relentless assault, the high-pitched shriek of incoming shells followed by the earth-shaking thump of their impact, the constant rattling cough of the Vickers guns, the distant, agonized screams of the wounded. Rajan noticed the subtle, sickening sweet scent of leaking gas quickly dispersed by the wind, but a chilling reminder of yet another unseen horror. He saw flashes of faces, distorted by terror and grim determination, mouths open in silent shouts. The line wavered, buckled, but did not break, fueled by a collective,
desperate will to push on, even when every fiber of their being screamed for retreat. He caught a glimpse of Karim again, astonishingly still moving, albeit slowly, dragging himself through the mud, his face a mask of exhaustion and terror, yet his eyes fixed on Rajan, a desperate plea for guidance and a silent plea for survival. He knew with a chilling certainty that this was their last stand. The objective, a dark, ominous silhouette against the grey dawn, seemed impossibly far, an unassailable fortress that promised only their demise. Yet they pressed on, driven not by hope of victory, but by the deeper, more profound need to fulfill their duty, to honor the fallen, and to face their end with dignity. The torrent of steel and despair continued to rage, consuming everything in its path. But amid the chaos, a fragile flicker of shared resolve burned fiercely, a testament to the enduring human spirit even in the face of absolute annihilation.
The cacophony of the assault had subsided, replaced by a ghastly, echoing silence, punctuated only by the distant, sporadic rattle of gunfire and the low moans of the wounded. The strong point, though battered, still stood, an unyielding monument to the futility of their charge. Rajan lay sprawled in the churned mud, his body a map of pain, every breath a shallow, burning agony. The bitter cold of the earth seeped into his bones, a chilling counterpoint to the fading heat of the battle. He could feel the coarse fabric of his uniform, once a vibrant part of his identity, now heavy and sodden with mud and blood clinging to his skin. His hand, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled for the small, tarnished silver amulet beneath his tunic, its cool surface a faint echo of comfort in the overwhelming desolation. He managed to push himself onto his elbows, his vision blurred by the smoke and the sheer exhaustion. The landscape before him was a tableau of utter devastation, a moonscape of craters and shattered earth, littered with the broken forms of men. He saw flashes of his men still, silent, their faces turned towards the indifferent sky. Karim was among them, his young face frozen in a grimace of pain and surprise, his youthful body a tragic, still form amidst the debris. A wave of profound grief washed over Rajan, sharp and suffocating, a silent lament for the innocent lives offered up to this insatiable monster. He closed his eyes for a moment, the image of Karim's mother, waiting in vain in a distant village, flashing through his mind. Bishnu, astonishingly, was still moving, albeit slowly, dragging himself towards a small crater, his breath ragged. His face was streaked with mud and blood, but his eyes still held a spark of that unyielding Gurkha resolve. He reached the lip of the crater and collapsed, his kukuri still clutched in his hand, its blade dulled by the mud. Rajan watched him, a silent farewell passing between the two warriors, a shared understanding that their journey was reaching its end. Bishnu managed a weak nod, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, perhaps seeing the mountains of Nepal in his final moments. The psychological toll was now absolute, the mind reeling from the unadulterated horror. Rajan felt a strange detachment, as if his spirit had already begun to separate from his broken body. Yet, amidst the encroaching darkness, a singular powerful impulse seized him. He fumbled in his tunic pocket, his fingers stiff and clumsy, extracting a small, mud-stained notebook and a stub of a pencil. His turban, once proud, was now a tattered, blooded mess, but beneath it, the thoughts still churned, clear and urgent. He had letters to write, messages to send, even if he knew they would never reach their destination. With painstaking effort, he began to scrawl in the notebook, the pencil slipping in his trembling fingers. He wrote of the bitter cold, of the relentless mud, of the camaraderie forged in the crucible of despair. He wrote of Karim, the boy who had faced an old man's war, and of Bishnu, the mountain warrior who had fought with unwavering courage. He poured out his fear, not of death itself, but of oblivion, the chilling dread that their sacrifices, their bravery, their very existence here, so far from home, would be forgotten. He articulated the profound fear that his people, their faith, and their quiet, unyielding fight would simply vanish, absorbed into the vast, indifferent tapestry of empire, leaving no trace. He described the desolate landscape, the constant sounds of battle, the pervasive smell of death, ensuring that every sensory detail of their purgatory was captured on the fading pages. He penned a final silent message to his wife, not of despair, but of enduring love, a promise of a connection that transcended even death and distance. He described the vibrant colors of Jaipur, the warmth of the sun, the laughter of their children, creating a poignant contrast between the beauty of his memory and the brutality of his present. He wrote with a fierce urgency, compelled by the desperate need for his story and the stories of his forgotten comrades to echo beyond the mud and the blood. Each word was a defiance against the silence, a desperate assertion of their existence. As the last strength drained from him, Rajan's head fell back against the cold, damp earth. The small notebook slipped from his grasp, falling open to a page where the ink blurred, smudged by a drop of his own blood. The final, unfinished sentence spoke of the fight for what truly matters. His eyes, wide and unseeing, now reflected the vast, indifferent sky, a canvas that held no memory of the countless lives it had witnessed fade. Havildar Rajan Singh, the officer from Jaipur, had fought a war that was not his own, but in his final act, he had fought for something profoundly his, the enduring legacy of his people, his faith, and the unspoken courage of men who had journeyed half a world away to meet their end in the mud of Flanders. Their bodies lay scattered, anonymous sacrifices, but their spirits, unyielding and defiant, had carved their names into the very heart of that desolate land. Their deaths were not in vain, for in their silent sacrifice they whispered a universal truth, that even in the face of absolute annihilation, the human spirit, with its capacity for love, duty, and remembrance, finds a way to leave an indelible mark, an echo in the mud that transcends time and space, inviting all who witness it to reflect on the profound cost of war and the enduring power of human connection. The last fading light of dawn illuminated the landscape, a solemn, silent witness to the profound, tragic beauty of their final stand.